if you took one of the greatest restaurants in the world, that had 3 Michelin stars, they are one of the best in the world, and you took a recipe for some soup that they make, and you took that to your local soup kitchen, and you said, hey, can you guys make this? It's the same exact recipe made by the best person that could ever make it. You're fundamentally going to get 2 different outcomes. When you take that analogy, you look at laboratory testing, we don't take a product like a cannabis flower or like a cannabis formulated patch, for example, and just stick it into a piece of equipment, right? The process of extracting the cannabinoids is significantly different, laboratory over laboratory over laboratory.
Justin Ihnken is CEO and founder of QTNM Labs, an advanced analytical laboratory providing research, development, and regulatory compliance services for pharmaceutical companies. What he doesn't know about testing isn't worth knowing. So what are we all in the dark on when it comes to understanding great product? And we'll say hello and welcome to another edition of the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton. Here is my colleague, co-founder, and generally nice fellow, Jamie Bonthron. Happy Friday, Jamie.
Happy Friday to you, sir. Very much looking forward to the weekend. How you doing?
I think I'm all right. I mean, now the holiday vibe, I'm embracing, the dull grey reality of the, daily grind. But, it's, when you're working in the cannabis sector, it's, it makes it a little bit brighter, I think. So,
good.
Agree. And we have a special guest today. We have Justin Ihnken, who is the CEO of QTNM Labs based out of Odense in Denmark. So good to meet you, sir. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you're doing, and we'll take it from there.
Hello, Dave and Jamie. Appreciate you guys having me on today. Super excited. I know this has been call it a work in progress the last couple of times, just here and there going through the summer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everyone in a room at the same time, even virtually, is a fun challenge sometimes.
Sometimes. But no, look, I appreciate you guys having me on today. Like you said, my name is Justin Ihnken. I'm the CEO and co-founder of QTNM Labs. QTNM is an analytical laboratory headquartered in Odense, Denmark. We specialize in natural product chemistry, providing both research and development laboratory services, GMP batch release testing services, as well as clinical trial laboratory support for the cannabis industry. I'd say one of the things we like to say is that, we are not a cannabis company, but really, we are a pharmaceutical laboratory. But we want to make it very clear that we do support the cannabis industry. And in doing so, we want to put forward the best science we can.
Absolutely. And sort of picking up on in terms of sort of cannabis testing, I mean, what are there some big misconceptions there? I mean, what's some of the biggest sort of challenges that you're facing? I mean, if you're working with, I guess, mainstream pharmaceutical companies as well, I mean, how have you kind of, when you talk to people about you working in that, they go, oh, cannabis. I mean, is it similar stigmas to kind of generally working in cannabis, or does it have its own kind of unique challenges when it comes to sort of testing environments?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at the testing, call it testing environments or the laboratory testing services, right? It's far and few between that you run into someone that really understands fundamentally how laboratories work, right? So ideally, there's 2 types of laboratories. You have a research and development laboratory, which is really more identifying itself as someone that is, or something, or a group of people that are searching for something that they don't know, but hoping to find something. We call that a non-targeted search, right? And then you have quality control laboratories, which are at that point searching for something that they've been told to ensure is or is not present. We call that targeted search. So, starting there, you build a foundation that is quite rarely known by the average, the average industry participant, call it that. And as a result, right, you have very little understanding of what goes on in a laboratory. Quality control laboratories and research and development laboratories are very, very different things, from the way they operate, the way that they're staffed, the way that they're governed and controlled. They're just it's a different tool. So I think some of the misconceptions really lie in what laboratories do in their role. But when it comes to specific types of laboratories, oftentimes, I think I use this example in the cannabis industry, is that, laboratories are not built for a one-size-fits-all type of approach, right? You have a laboratory that is built for testing insulin, let's say. But at the same time, you have laboratories that are built for testing spinach, right? There's never a world where it makes sense to send the spinach to be tested at the insulin laboratory. It wouldn't work. Yet a misconception is that in the cannabis industry, that's what's happening. And there's a lot of I say hurdles, obstacles, frustrations that arise from it, right?
Absolutely. That's a great analogy. We'll keep it to basic analogies like that. I can keep up with insulin versus spinach in terms of differences. Yes, definitely.
Exactly.
It's about my level of technical aptitude. I think it's interesting you say that people think, or industry participants maybe think about cannabis as quite maybe a narrow product, when clearly from a testing perspective, there's an enormous amount of depth into what any one company might be looking for to send a product through testing for. What the companies you're working with at the moment, what are people looking to use you guys for, or other testers in the market? What are the things that people are crying out for that they can't do themselves? And maybe what are the things that people are crying out for that a lot of the industry at large can't do at the moment?
I would say I think it's a good question, right? A lot of people wonder, what happens when the product reaches a laboratory, be it cannabis sample, be it pharmaceuticals, be it natural products, be it anything, right? The laboratory themselves provide a service based on what the customer requests, and we can get into kind of the nature of the relationship between the customer and the laboratory. But when it comes to common types of testing for cannabis, you kind of think of, okay, what is the underlying product we have here? Well, we have a product that supposedly, according to the person sending it, has a narcotic substance, a euphoric controlled substance. At that point, that substance has scheduled responsibility of the holder to, one, report, identify, quantify, and make sure that the person that is the end receiver, be it patient, be it distributor, be it manufacturer, whatever that is, it's very important that those people are informed as to the contents, right? It's the same thing with anything else. You want to know that what's on the label of any drug is in fact what its contents contain. So when we think about cannabis, generally you're thinking about, well, what's the first thing that is in the plant or in the drug or in the product that would be, at a scheduled perspective, very, very important for controlling. So we look at that, we say, okay, well, it's the narcotics, right? At that point, we are looking at cannabinoid content. We're looking at least within the European Union or in Denmark, you have THC, CBD, CBN, and various acids that are produced from there. But in most contexts, I think that is probably the most important thing, simply because it's a scheduled narcotic. So it's super important to understand exactly what is in there. And let's not forget, this is a natural product we're talking about. It's consistently degrading. It's consistently going through chemical change as it is losing moisture, as it's drying, as it's being subjected to different environments, be it in transport, be it in packaging, be it in processing, right? You're affecting it. You wouldn't leave, and I'll go back to using a simple example. You wouldn't leave a liter of milk on the counter for a week and come back and be surprised that it's no longer consumable, right? It's the same thing. It's not the same thing that when you left it. So when products leave facilities, they have a shelf life. And I think people quickly forget that, this is a plant we're talking about here. If you don't water a plant, it's going to die. But now when you harvest a cannabis plant, you're talking about the flower. You actually have something that started with a specific amount of moisture content that, as it's subject to, air, it's going to be then subject to degradation. So you really have to keep a handle on that. And I think that that's something that also is super important, because then you're, too much moisture, then you're potentially subject to microbial substances, E. coli, salmonella, things like that.
Just thinking about that from you mentioned customer relationship perspective, is that you're going to receive a product, and in a testing environment, you will be asked to do test X, Y, and Z to get whatever result is needed for whatever certification or whoever it's going to, and for whatever reporting circumstance. It sounds like, because you guys are almost the last point, you're the barrier to exit effectively for the product, because it has to be right before it goes any further, and it has to be clearly defined. Is there pressure on you guys from customers to get testing? Do you feel the pressure of maybe collapse in other parts of the supply chain, so you end up with a product that's a week late to you, that's then different to what was expected pre-test? Is that something you guys have to wrestle with?
Man, really laying it on, Jamie. Look, I would say you have seen, or it has been seen in markets where laboratories that are operating at standards. I think it's happened, far and few between in the U.S. or North American markets, where you do see a laboratory that, when you have customers that have a significant amount of product that need to go to market, it is in your best interest financially to ensure that your customer is going to get that product to market. But in an industry like North America, you have the ability to then perhaps find other laboratories, because what if the laboratory made a mistake and then they have the ability to rerun a sample, and you actually find out, what, the certificate from that lab across the street actually allows my product to go to market. Well, in a context of GMP or EU GMP, it doesn't really work like that. In order for you to release a product to market within, I'll speak to Denmark, as we're based in Denmark, is we're subject to pharmaceutical restraints, pharmaceutical requirements for cannabis, and specifically that around medical cannabis and cannabinoid based pharmaceuticals, so capsules, patches, pills, really more, I'd say, biotech focused. And in doing so, really, you have to go through significant barriers to entry to then register a product. Well, when you register your product, you have to tell the regulator who is your releasing laboratory, right? And when you have to inform the regulator of that, it's not so easy to just go find another lab. And I would say it's almost there to ensure that you can't, because there has to be a level of control. But when you have states or jurisdictions that have 10 or 15 different laboratories, then really you have that second, third, fourth, fifth chance of hope in the event that there's another laboratory that does better results, or quite honestly, let's, the elephant in the room, worse results. They have the ability to give you results that you want, but might not be necessarily the best.
Well, I'm going to say, I'll ask a question. I think I flunked out science, aged about, 12. But surely, and again, this is me not knowing anything, just playing devil's advocate. If 3, 4, 5, however many labs run the same sort of identical tests on a particular product, surely the result, why would it differ so greatly, even if they're done in the same environments and some similar? How can a big account for such difference?
It's a phenomenal question, an absolutely phenomenal question. I would say if you took one of the greatest restaurants in the world, that had 3 Michelin stars, they are one of the best in the world, and you took a recipe for some soup that they make, mm-hmm. and you took that to your local soup kitchen, and you said, hey, can you guys make this? Mm-hmm. It's the same exact recipe made by the best person that could ever make it. You're fundamentally going to get 2 different outcomes. Mm-hmm. When you take that analogy, you look at laboratory testing, we don't take a product like a cannabis flower or like a cannabis formulated patch, for example, and just stick it into a piece of equipment, right? The process of extracting the cannabinoids is significantly different, laboratory over laboratory over laboratory. They were talking down to the handling process of receiving the cannabis. You're talking about the way that it's stored, the way that it's registered, the way that it's weighed. So on the physical scale of the balance itself, to what degree of determination or to what degree of granularity are you going out to? Is it to 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal places that you're measuring this? Because that in itself will determine the amount of solution you used to extract the cannabinoids to get the best possible sample to analyze. We're talking about molecular compounds here. So it will differ. And when you talk about it like that, you say, well, is the product being shipped in the most homogenized way possible? Or are you trimming a plant and saying, okay, we're going to send the top over here, mids over here, and then, bare bottom buds over, to lab 3? Well, we all know then you're definitely going to get 3 different results, because it's just the way the cannabinoids are formulated. That then would come down to harvest and homogenization. So there are so many different ways of analyzing, and there's so many different ways of comparing, but what we're trending to talk to about here is standards and requirements, methodologies that are written and published by the World Health, sent down to federal governments, the European Union, then they take those very broad standards and then they actually ask each individual member state of the EU to adhere to them. Well, let's be honest, if you then you're playing the game of telephone where you say, this is a very broad point. It gets a little bit more specific when it changes from the World Health to the EU to the Danish government. Well, one, they're going to translate it. Two, they're going to implement it, but they're going to implement it how the country themselves sees it should be best implemented, right? There's freedom to operate. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but there's a huge opportunity to really tighten the robustness, I think, of the way that things are done. I mean, if I'm speaking in analogies, right, you could buy a Tesla in any country in the world and you're still getting the same exact Tesla no matter where you go. But that's just not the case when you go to different laboratories, even though they might be using very similar standards set out by global regulators, because there's so much freedom to operate.
Does that have any similarity for regular pharma, or is it because it typically isn't plant material? But that's not true. It is plant material. Aspirin comes from a willow tree. So how does it compare with typical pharma?
This is the farthest thing from a cannabis problem. This is a contract laboratory testing problem globally. So and I say that is what we are so passionate about. We are so passionate about, one, publicly being open about supporting the cannabis industry, because it really does have severe health effects for individuals and can have great improvements on people's function of life. However, if you can take an industry that already is, I don't have to tell you guys, I mean, it's already stigmatized, it's already mistrusted, it's already been abused and really put out to pasture in some regards across regulators, across politicians, across doctors and patients. But if you could take an industry like cannabis and bring transparency and trust through fact-based laboratory testing, well, what can you do for traditional pharmaceuticals? Because at that point, you can take something that people already trust and say, hold on, wait a minute, there is a huge amount of transparency you can add. And I think that's really what we stand for, is saying, okay, well, look, we're not only going to support an industry like medical cannabis, but we're also going to show that this is not just a cannabis problem. It's the farthest thing. Cannabis is actually an incredible opportunity to outline or showcase the inefficiencies, the lack of trust, the lack of transparency, the lack of robustness in how labs operate.
I think it seems like cannabis was transparency. Do you think, again, James to answer this question, but do you think Big Pharma wants that level of transparency? Or do you think it's necessary? Do you think people, patients demand it?
I think, right, and this is something we talk with our team about all the time. I think we are living in a world where people, one, care more about what they put in their body than ever before. But there's something that they care about more. They care about what goes in their kids, full stop. And I think that's a huge it's a huge validation to what we believe, is that people deserve to know what they're putting in their bodies. They deserve to have understanding or insight or ownership of the data, because it does affect them. There was a research project done, call it, research article that was written, I want to say early this year, March 2022. It outlined that they discovered 10% of all medications that end up in developing countries are counterfeit. Does that mean that, then we're talking about big pharma medications. Does that mean that these medications are actually coming out of pharmaceutical companies and they're counterfeit? No. It's because Pfizer doesn't sell products directly to consumers. It's because it goes through layers of distribution, layers of white labeling, which then it gets diluted into, huge batches of X medication, ends up getting diluted or separated into smaller vials, and then it goes out. At that point, right, you have huge opportunities to bring that transparency when there's, of that, 80% is ending up in Southeast Asia, Africa, India, developing countries, where you have diabetics who are not getting insulin. People are actively wanting answers. And now I think you're starting to your question, Dave. I think people are really now, to a point, have stressed it enough where now pharmaceuticals, big pharma as well, are acting and they are moving.
It's interesting that we talk about a lot, Justin, when we speak to people like yourselves and anyone really in the industry. Something that we say that we feel at least resonates is that if you're going to be in this industry, you have to have some sort of advocacy bone in your body to do with the plant. And it's interesting that you can find that in something that's so clinical and is so precise and methodical. It's taking something very technical and applying it in an advocate sense, in a way that helps people understand more about it and helps delayer those stigmas in a different way. It's not just about talking and normalizing it as a medicine. It's saying not only is it a medicine for some people, here are all the facts about it. Here's all the numbers. Here's everything you could ever want to know. And this is, it's gospel. You can trust this. I think there's something really powerful to be said about that.
Yeah, I think, look, we have a responsibility. I think my co-founder, when we first started this, right, we said, look, our backgrounds are not in laboratory construction, right? Our backgrounds are not, we don't have PhDs in natural product research. But what we can do is we can build a stage for those individuals to stand on, and we can build a good one, and we can build a big one, and one that really, if we surround ourselves with the right people and the best people with regard to making those decisions, then there's a huge opportunity for us as a company to really help a lot of people. And I think that's really what keeps us going. I think if we wanted to build a laboratory, I mean, come on, we would have built a small little box somewhere and we would have said, here, send us as many samples as possible. We'll kick out as much results as possible. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, our mission is not to build a laboratory. It's to make change. Our mission is to really help the people that otherwise don't even know what they're subject to. They don't even know what they are putting in their body. I mean, how many of us got COVID vaccines and asked what batch, where was the batch release certificate, what laboratory tested this, and how do you go through about the process of ensuring that this meets the quality control regulatory requirements before I let you inject this into my body? I mean, I heard multiple stories of people getting injected with saline solution. Well, yeah, I mean, whose fault is that? Is it a little bit of carelessness, a little bit of irresponsibility? Yeah, but I think at some point it falls ultimately, when you boil it down, on quality control. We're talking about quality control at its core is knowledge that's deserved to be owned by the patient.
It's that sense of trust, isn't it? I mean, again, better or worse, we put our trust in, doctors and healthcare professionals almost sort of unquestioningly. Like you say, with the example with the vaccines, like we just rely on their work that this is what they say it is. That the medications are being administered have the desired effect. And it's kind of like when you start to think about the level of trust needing to elevate, particularly when it comes to something that's much maligned and stigmatized as cannabis, it almost feels like that need for such transparency is still there. It's used to rail against that stigma. In order to prove that this is something that has many different benefits and is not bad drugs, we need to have that additional layer of trust and transparency when it comes to proving what's actually in it. Do you feel that that's the case?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we stand by that so wholeheartedly. It's really, we're in a unique situation where, from a laboratory perspective, we're not a consulting agency. We're not an advisory firm, and we're not going to advise you on how to do things or, best practices. We are at its core a contract laboratory. Contract meaning we are an extension of your business. You contract us in to do the things that otherwise you just don't do in-house. Some companies do. Some big pharma companies do have a quality control laboratory in-house, but they're always going to outsource some things that they just don't need done so often. It doesn't make sense to employ a team of 20 PhDs to do. So in that case, there's always going to be one stakeholder who has a huge opportunity to outline the trust based on facts. And that's the quality control laboratory. Look, we are giving results. You can do with them whatever you'd like. These are the results. And you know what? Send the regulators. Send anyone you would like in to see how we execute methods, how we stand by quality. I mean, I think we're so steadfast on that. It really is what we believe separates us from other laboratories where, look, again, we're not here to build a lab. We're here to really impact change.
I think that's a brilliant position to not only be in, but want to try and forge yourself. I think it's very admirable, and it's the right way to go about quality in every respect.
Yeah.
Looking ahead and some of the tests that are coming out, as people find out more and more about cannabis and its effects, and there's more studies into the different parts of a plant. I'm not going to. There's all sorts of research out there about the entourage effect, and then there's a lot of research that says it doesn't exist, and there's always a back and forth, and that's how things are ratified in the scientific community. Are there any tests that are kind of coming out, or that are going to be innovative in the next few years, that look into maybe deeper into terpenes, or is there anything specific to do with cannabis that is on the horizon that you can talk about a little bit?
Yeah, I would say, look, a lot of the analysis that does exist in the market today, at least from a quality control perspective, right? It's binary, right? Do you have pesticides or do you not? Do you have microbials or do you not? Very rarely do you have a unique analysis like cannabinoids, where you not only have to identify, but you need to then quantify. I think with regard to that next wave or next generation of requirements set out by regulators, I think it's going to move towards an increased number of cannabinoids, right? So you have the requirement to not only identify, let's say 5, but maybe 6 or 7 or 8, as we learn more and as we gain more understanding of the way that these individual compounds react with each other. Again, back to that entourage effect, how they degrade over time, how are they subjected to different environments, what happens to the underlying molecular structure of this compound when it does get heated up, right? We all know that. I mean, decarboxylation is a real thing. So in that case, right, the more we learn about the underlying cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, really it will, I think, come to a fork in the road where say, okay, is this worth identifying or looking into further, or is it not? I think there's plenty of studies with regard to terpenes and the correlations that they may or may not have to cannabinoids, or the cannabinoids that do or do not have a psychological effect, right? There's many different arguments that some people make, some people don't make. But at that point, right, I think we're just going to move to a level of added granularity, less innovative test methods or different types of test methods.
It always strikes me like it's almost like discovering a new planet or something like that with cannabis. It's like it's always been there. It's been there for thousands of years. People are only just, some people have made sort of, these grandiose claims. They understand what it's like because they've been there and like, oh yeah. And then now the rest of us, actually the scientific community, say, well, actually, yeah, there is this thing, and we are trying to understand unpick what it's for or how it operates. And it feels like, we're only at the beginning.
We're finally there. I think we're almost to a point now where the conversation around cannabis, right? If you said the word cannabis, or even marijuana or weed or whatever you have that are less, it's funny, we very rarely use the terms marijuana and weed, right? It's just because from a cannabis perspective, I mean, it is described in the European pharmacopoeia as medical cannabis flower or cannabis flower, or right. It's the legal name for the plant. At that point, I'd say the understanding of what different types of plants are adding to this, right? There's a history behind it all, but I think we're finally getting to a point in history where the open conversation is less stigmatized. And what that means is that we're actually moving towards a society that has this societal approach to accepting the conversation around it, as opposed to saying, oh, I don't actually want to be associated with people that even talk about that. And I think that really is such an incredible movement. I think it's the work of all stakeholders in this industry that's moving that forward. The advocacy, really those heroes out there that are true advocates for the actual change that needs to be implemented. It's the recognition, but you can recognize anything, but until you make change around it, you're still going to be forced to, adhere to current regulations. Those are the regulations that I think we are becoming more and more accustomed to speaking about. So I think we, to your question, Dave, I mean, I think we are moving in a direction where research is not only allowed, but actually coveted. People want to be doing research. People want to be engaging in the conversations at a scientific level. I could say, there's plenty of researchers that we have. They've never, ever, ever partaken in any sort of cannabinoid-based product ever, right? But they're so intrigued by the chemical complexity of the plant, because now we're finally able to use $1 million machines to uncover the underlying molecular compounds. We're at the forefront of technology, and now you're taking a product that has for many, many years been kind of shunned out of that conversation, right? The cool kids didn't want to talk about it, and now the cool kids want to begin actually researching it.
No, it's that amazing. And like you say, the complexity of it, it has people's curiosity in so many different ways, and it's, it is that kind of new territory, and that the ability to sort of say, okay, we can do this now, let's do it. It's
it's super cool. I mean, there's 3, if not 4 universities that hold a medical cannabis possession license in Denmark. We were talking about universities, publicly funded universities that are saying, you know what? These are awesome programs. Let's collaborate with researchers. Let's get professors, tenured researchers on these projects. I mean, this is something that really has been so profound in just the last 5 years. So talk about where the European market is moving. I think it stems from 2 places. It stems from academia really stepping in and saying, you know what? We're okay talking about this. We're okay understanding more of it, because you know what? It is real. And it is a viable option for treatments globally. So I think it's cool. It's a really cool opportunity. And to be part of that, I think it's really awesome. I mean, the journey that we're on, I think is, it's a journey of a lifetime. And I'm super, super excited to be surrounded with so many great people, so many researchers that are just so enthralled with the complexity of a plant that, has been around for so long that you don't think about it in that context until you start talking to these people. And they're so inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you're going great guns. Was it the Forbes 30 under 30 in European medical?
I was there. I appreciate that. It's funny.
How did that come about? I mean, did they just sort of call you up and say, hey, you guys doing some good stuff? Or
you guys are kind of cool. Yeah, you want to join us? No. You know what? There's definitely a couple avenues that I think definitely put us on there. But I think, having come from backgrounds that weren't traditionally medical by any stretch is always kind of cool. And when you say, hey, there's these 2 guys that are starting this company in a country that they didn't grow up in, they weren't born in. And oh, by the way, they have no formal background or training in any of this. And now they're taking professors from universities and, directors from pharmaceutical companies to come join them. I think is it makes you say, wait, what? Really?
Sounds like the ragtag bunch story, doesn't it? It's like the film script, like the Mighty Ducks. You're recruiting these maverick professors from all over Denmark on your quest to make cannabis,
Oh, yeah. It's awesome, and it's super cool. So yeah, I think that definitely contributed. We surround ourselves with some great mentors that definitely really highlight the cool stuff that we're doing. So when it came time to being asked, hey, would you guys like to be nominated for this? I said, sure, but there's no way we'd ever get put on that list. Some of the people on that list are absolutely incredible. And I guess they say the same thing about us just because it's respective fields, but it really came from, people saying to us, we really love what you're doing, what you stand for. And I think if we were just part of a normal business, it would be different. But I think we have this culture around us and this mission and this brand that we're building that truly defines that. It's not really that laboratory that we're building, but it's the change. And I think that's what's the common thread throughout all of these. I mean, all of these people that, I was able to spend some time in Israel, about a week and a half with, the other listers from our class this year. And, everybody has something in common. One, they are really impacting change, right? Not necessarily starting a business, not necessarily being an entrepreneur, right? It's some of these people at great companies that are impacting change. Really, and they're all so committed to the mission, right? They're so, I say, dedicated to the mission.
That's it. But again, it's just to recognize. I mean, it's obviously you're doing something right. But
thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you.
No, not at all. And well, just to kind of round things up, what's happening for the next sort of few months? What are you guys kind of excited about? What does it? Rest of the year heralds.
Yeah, so we're the end of this year is going to be exciting. We really have some great hires coming in. We are going into the phase 2 of our build project. So we have a facility that I'm sitting in now, which is about 1,500 square meters, give or take about 15,000 square feet, of which for the past year and a half or so, we've only occupied a third of it, so 500 square meters of it. So it means that we have 1,000 square meter laboratory that's been, over the last year and a half designed architecturally, engineering wise, all of the permits, all of the, the stuff that the regulators need to come in and approve, and all of the contractors, really, we've got around the table and spent the last, I'd say, year and a half to kick off the project. So that's going to get started at the end of the year. We're super excited about that. In the meantime, we have our laboratory facility that we built that we're in now, but it's the expansion that's going to be a lot of fun. I'd say that's one thing. It's our added methods and capabilities that are going to come down the line in the next few months, doing more advanced deep dive research, but also begin offering more and more cannabinoid-based analysis. We really want to be focusing on what we find most people need, which is stability studies, research studies, really getting as much data about products early on has been something that really a lot of people have benefited from. The last thing you want to see is someone goes through the whole process of developing a product from a grow cycle to a harvest cycle, and that process, and they're not really collecting data harvest after harvest and find out maybe that strain is just not the most commercially viable. It doesn't have that level of tenacity. It doesn't have that level of consistency that you really want it to have yield wise, right? Or production of batch over batch, harvest over harvest. So being able to give that knowledge, give that data early on has been super helpful. I think a lot of people benefit from that. We're building out the sales team, so that's super excited. We're going to start really working on gaining more market access or market trust, both in Denmark and outside of Denmark. So our plans are to scale through Europe. We're super excited about that. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff coming up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sounds good. But no, we'll follow your story with great interest. But it's been great to have you on, and thank you so much for sharing. It's always an interesting insight into, and it's just really cool to find out more about what you're doing and how all the different processes and how things add up to essentially the same mission as many other aspects of the sector as well, which I think is really cool. And so thank you very much, Justin. We'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, fellas. Really appreciate being on, and looking forward to seeing the next conference.